Last Pint Productions is pleased to announce the arrival of the Wilson twins, Margot Evelyn Wilson and Luna Lee Wilson. We would also like to apologize for this week's episode of The New Way with Ben and Matt. It contains content not suitable for, anyone, especially babies. It contains adult content including sex, and more sex. Sorry, Margot and Luna, your dad and Uncle Matt are sick men. Listener discretion is advised.
Would you tell us the nature of your relationship with Mr. Boz?
I had sex with him for about 1.5 years. I liked having sex with him. He wasn't afraid of experimenting.
Is that a hair gel?
Yeah.
Great.
I can use No, you don't have to. You don't.
I just ran out.
We forgot about the stairs. Isn't that silly? It was very easy. I just pulled out the nail.
37. My girlfriend sucked 37 dicks.
In a row?
Everybody wants to be naked and famous. Everybody wants to be just like me and make it.
Will you help teach me about this? What is it? A new way?
Welcome to the New Way
Don't even do that.
Come on. Let me finish it. Come on. That's really good. I can't do it now. Now I'm completely out of my sex-framed mind. Welcome to the New Way with putting a damper on the sexual tension in the room, Ben, and brimming with sexual spunk, Matt. Welcome.
Hi, how's it going, guys? So we figured, before we even get into it, I'm just going to tell you that you can go off, obviously, on lastpintprod.com.
Hand motions.
Yes. And you can find all of the links to all of the podcasts from there. If you want to listen to an old one, then that's great.
You're like a stewardess, showing me where the exits are.
If you want to listen to a new one, then this is the new one. So you're in the right place. But we're also on Twitter, on Facebook, facebook.com/lastpint, or at lastpintprod on Twitter, or you can go anywhere else and find us.
If somehow you're listening to this before the other one has come out, I've made a huge mistake, and you can send us an email and let us know that I have released the wrong podcast in the order, which is very possible.
Today, I don't even think we need to even, dick around that much.
No. Best sake of the year.
I meant to do that. Though.
There ain't no dicking around when you're talking about sex.
First off, Matt and I we threw around the idea for a while about, maybe watching a couple porn, films really quick. Or maybe, jerking each other off. But no,
we just had full-blown sex in between podcasts.
Yeah, we used to record one, all it took was 4 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it was 4 minutes. You're too kind. But so we made with the love, and now we're making with the podcast in post-coital bliss. We're actually right now, if you can picture it, I want you to put on your imagination helmets out there right now. Ben and I are on the couch together. God damn it. Ben and I are naked, spooning one another on my couch. I'm the big spoon. Ben's the taller but little spoon. And I'm just running my fingers through Ben's beard right now. So just imagine this picture of our bodies swirl together like Jello pudding.
How many listeners did you just kind of theorize that we had?
7 people just threw up in their mouths right now. I guarantee it, and they're never going to listen again. One of those is my mom. Sorry, Mom, but I mean, Ben's just so cuddly. I can't help it.
Yes, apparently I am. Anyways, today the reason.
Sorry, Beth.
If you can't tell from obviously the ridiculous open, we are going to be talking about sex. And we're not going to be talking about sex just in general. Well, I think I've already done that enough in the questions that I've asked you at the end.
Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me.
Yeah, we're going to keep this going for a while. We're actually going to talk about sex and film. and the role that it plays in film and has in the history of film.
I so wish we'd figured out sound effects before this podcast. Eventually, one day, we're going to kind of start. We don't want to get Morning Zoo on you, but we do want to kind of pepper in some sound effects while we're taping. And this would be the most perfect podcast ever to do that. But
I thought that was what the open is for. I'm sure the open is going to be really.
Oh, the open is going to be amazing. Don't you worry about it.
I'm really...
In fact, I have some ideas for us to record it.
Well, the funny thing is the last podcast we did was about CGI, where I think I might have said the F word. I might have said fuck once or twice. Other than that, I think is the most docile and PG rated.
It's our Oscar reel.
right. Which is now we're going to talk about sex, which is I anticipate us needing a 9-minute disclaimer at the beginning of this episode.
I'm just glad that there's a towel on the coffee table, so I think that's going to come in handy. Hey, ooh, a little too on the dick right there.
Are there any other pornified film titles that you've come up with recently?
You gave me a couple. I was trying to. I still can't get past Despicable Me. I don't know why. Every time I think of it, I laugh really hard.
I can't believe you thought that Percy Waxon, seaman of Monster Cocks, was trying too hard.
I keep forgetting what the hell the actual title of that movie is, so it never works.
It's Percy Jackson's Sea of Monsters.
How about Ejaculation for Elysium?
That works.
That kind of works. Kick It in My Ass, too.
Lick My Ass, too.
Lick Ass.
Lick Ass.
Lick Ass. I like that.
Ass,
Lick
too.
Ass, too. Trying to think of what else is coming out. What's the conjugal visits? The Conjuring?
The conjugalating.
The conjugalating. That's not a... That doesn't work. That doesn't work. I'm sure there's something with conjuring that we could do with that. The conjuring?
The conjuring?
The conjuring or the conjuring? I like conjuring because we do a lot of cock word plays, but there's not a lot of cunt word plays. And I think that's sexist, to be honest. I think that we should be equal opportunity offenders, and if cock can be thrown anywhere it wants, why can't the cunt go wherever it wants?
We're just gonna throw cock and cunt all over the place.
The cunt wants what the cunt wants, Ben. And that's something my grandmother taught me.
Well, good for you.
Sorry.
On that note, are you apologizing to your mother?
I apologize to my grandmother.
All right. Well, anyways, we're going to talk about the role of sex in film. I'm kind of sad. There are a few people who I wish we had on this podcast with us.
This would be probably a better group. Sex is always better with a group. So I agree with that.
This would have been a great one to have two girls in on. Just imagine if we
don't know any.
If we had sex talk with two girls.
It would have to be. We would have had to have brought some really.
Honestly,
Amanda. Would be. We need someone really uncomfortable with it.
Well, I actually think we need to do this. We're going to talk about some sort of subcategory of sex, or we're going to talk about something like that. I think later on, but we have to get two girls in here.
Well, I think we can continue the same discussion, but from a female perspective. What do women find to be the sexiest moments on film? Which is kind of what I was going for with this podcast.
That's a pretty odd. That's what you want from a female perspective.
No, God, no. When I said sex in film, it was kind of what are part of it is things that either personified how you view sex, or things that just are sexy that you find sexy on film.
We have approached this completely different ways.
Oh, okay.
Apparently.
All right. So you're going with the full on what broke ground as far as sex in mainstream films. I did the same, but some of the ones on mine are, I think, personal, as are most movies about sex. We can get the
personal ones. I didn't write down any of the personal ones, but I can definitely get to it.
Okay.
For sure.
Ben goes into the spank bank and starts pulling out movies immediately.
I'm sitting here thinking oh yeah.
By the way, Ben and I are both drinking heavily in order to try to tamp down the erections that could be spawned by a discussion of such titillating, that's right, titillating conversation. So this podcast is being brought to you, for me, by a dirty gin martini, and Ben...
I'm drinking sake. Like
sake.
usual.
So, sake and martinis, they keep the weird erections away. That's good. I like that.
Interesting.
All right, these long. You can't have a long.
I don't
pause
know.
in the sex
I don't know what
one.
to follow up weird erection with.
Lucky you. How many times I've had to follow up a weird erection? I will have to say I have to hand it to Dan Harmon and Donald Glover on Community for, I think, for me at least, coining the phrase "I have the weirdest boner right now," which I don't know why that stuck in my head, but it always cracks me up. So that's where all of these erection jokes are coming from.
Okay. Well, obviously, this is rife for, especially since Matt's drinking martinis. We could joke about sex all day long, and we often do. As a matter of fact, when we're not on the podcast, all we talk about is like every other thing that we say is a euphemism for sex.
Just pretty true.
Yeah,
That's What She Said podcast.
Yes, that's pretty much the way it works. But I did want to actually, and so I know that you have this list of things that you want to talk about. If you wouldn't mind, I would like to just go into sort of, like I said, there's not going to be.
Ben literally just jerks out of his seat with his hands out in front of him in the most aggressive manner that freaked me out.
I'm just trying to I'm trying to calm the conversation, to actually literally talk about the subject that we brought up.
All right, go for it.
Okay.
Please.
We're talking about sex and film. So, first off, yeah, we know that you guys watch porn. Close your porn windows.
Mom.
Please, close them.
Mom.
We're not going to be... Hold
on a second. Mom, close your copy of 50 Shades of Grey. Close your copy of the sequel. And let's continue on.
Absolutely. We're not going to be talking about anything that's involving porn. We're not going to get into any Lovelace. We're not going to get into any thing that was meant to be titillating beyond the... I think there's a disclaimer there. We're not putting anything porn like that's. We're not going to be talking about the progression of pornography in America or anywhere else, for that matter.
We will be going in depth into the progression of pornography in Antarctica,
in Italy.
It involves a lot of taking off of furs.
Yes. It wasn't my design to talk anything about pornography or because it's
mainstream cinema only.
We're talking about mainstream cinema, and
with a few art house thrown in there.
Well, yes. Well, a lot of art house films that involve sex heavily became mainstream films because of their either the way that they were perceived or because of the way that they were condemned by everybody. And that's sort of the golden rule that you realize in cinema is when a bunch of people come out and say, don't go see this movie, everybody goes and sees that movie.
That's how it works.
Which is... Hollywood is one of the few mediums and one of the few industries where I actually truly do believe that any press is good press. When you have...
I disagree highly.
Well, I mean, we could talk about The Lone Ranger. But...
Yeah, I mean, you gotta talk about summer movies. Take summer movies out of that mix and you're probably close to right.
When
something's banned because of content, not because of quality.
I'm extricating, like, reviews. I'm talking about if something is talked about because it's, there's tons of stuff going on with this production, or, this is not supposed to be shown on the movie screen or on the television screen. In those cases, people tend to tune in more.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I'm trying to basically kind of communicate. But before we go into, I think, what kind of became the modern movement in cinema where nudity is acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
Nudity wasn't acceptable for a long time. With the advent of film and with the beginning of and the origins of film, there was a period between 1914, 1915, and 1929 where all you had was pre-code film. And then there was a period between 1929 and 1932 where the code was invented, where certain people weren't supposed to be allowed into movies. And certain people were. Like, you were supposed to be over 18 to get into this movie. However, it wasn't enforced until a specific movie. So just to kind of briefly knock on, like, to kind of touch on all of those, things.
To knock boots.
In the pre-code film era, there was obviously, when people realized they had this medium to utilize, where it used to be like dirty magazines or, pictures, illicit pictures that they would buy from these.
Or as your character in Oklahoma Soul, the little turn around things.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You had these Dorothy McHale films, Cleopatra, Tarzan, these films that were pre-code that actually had nudity in them to some degree. It was never meant to be titillating. You never had any sort of copulation. You never had anything along those lines. And so...
Effing?
What?
What'd you say? You never had
anything along those lines.
Oh, I thought you said effing.
No.
Really? You chose this moment in the podcast?
Oh, yeah. No, but... So it was this really interesting period of time where it was a new medium and they were trying to figure out what they could do and couldn't do. And there are obviously nude photos from the time there, and especially in the case of like Tarzan and the first Cleopatra, they were utilizing like natives and things along those lines, and they were using stock footage of people who were naked.
National Geographic style.
Yeah, exactly. So there were elements of sexuality in film and nudity in film, and then of course all of the puritanical thing kind of came down. But the first thing it really came down on was there was a Czech film that came out in 1932 called Ecstasy. It was released in 1932 called Ecstasy. And it was released in American markets and then subsequently banned from American markets because even though it didn't show sex or nudity, it showed two people having sex, but it only showed their faces.
Boring.
It was, well, yeah, boring, right? Actually, some people will get off on this.
Okay.
It was the first, what is classified as the first on-screen depiction of a female orgasm.
Oh. Those are real? Or was it like...
Sorry. Anyways, yes. What happened, and this is actually a very... we could extrapolate this topic and talk about it forever.
We could beat it to death. Yeah.
This is going to be the worst podcast ever.
we
really could talk about it for a long time, because the funny thing is that film, a Czech film, Ecstasy, is responsible for the code, the post-code films being put into place where they actually started enforcing it. They would not let certain people watch certain movies, and it's where they started banning movies from the U.S. because Ecstasy... There was a religious movement against showing that type of action on screen, and the MPAA, or what became the MPAA later, awful organization, basically said, okay, well, we can't have this in theaters, so we have to cut this, or you have to lose it.
We have to tell people what they're offended by.
Yeah, but we have to tell people what is good and what is not good to actually show on screen. So there was this period of experimental film with pre-code cinema actually had a lot of inherent sexuality leading up to the 30s. And with this last kind of thing where they were like, okay, well, we're finally actually showing sexual intercourse on screen. Even though it's not explicit, it's not pornographic, we're showing the expression between two people as they're having sex. It became essentially pornographic to the board, and it was shut down. And so there was a period basically from 1932 to 1959 where sex became a
taboo.
Not only a taboo, it became, because it was that they knew that people were going to be interested by the appeal of sex.
Gotcha.
But it was going to be something that was implied.
Gotcha.
Where the implication of sex, or the
cutting to the fireplace,
or the possibility of sex, was going to drive people to the movie theater to get that sort of titillating feel that they might be, which is ironic. I find extremely ironic, because the fact is that in these quote-unquote titillating images previously, none of them were really that titillating. Whereas I think that you could watch something from Ecstasy, or you could watch something from some of the pre-code films, and you would find them a lot less titillating than some of the poses and some of the things that were obviously meant to titillate the audience in the movies in the 40s and the 50s.
Yeah.
So anyways, I'm going to let you talk for a minute. Give me
No. I mean, I to be honest, I'm fascinated by the film history of stuff, which is really the main reason, like I said, I started the podcast. So Ben can educate me with his film school education. I don't have to pay tuition.
It's not just my film school education. A lot of this is not my film school education.
Okay, I mean, no, but it's like the one area I'm not as well versed in is classic cinema. I know some of the big ones. I know some of the smaller but still big ones. I don't know a lot of ones that no one has heard of. But yeah, I mean, you look back in the day of when there wasn't really supposed to be explicit like sex on screen. But you had a ton of sex symbols, which I think is really kind of interesting, where you've got all of these female sex symbols. From Marilyn Monroe was probably the most,
My next step was Some Like It Hot.
Okay, yeah. I mean, and you have these movies that, I mean, they really, it's, okay, this is going to be a weird analogy, or at least a weird comparison. I look at, like, kids nowadays. I have no idea what a teenage boy's life is like now with the internet. With the internet, they can see anything they want. I grew up in the 90s, and this was the time of waiting for the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition to come out, and our one friend whose father would allow them to have it, because we were all way too embarrassed to buy one ourselves. But one of my friends, his dad would buy the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition, and that magazine would get stickily handed around to everyone in our group. Like, there was no erotica for us. We couldn't really get into R-rated movies. We couldn't really rent R-rated movies. So, things that weren't inherently sexy, like the Sears catalog, and just these ideas, or music videos. That, for me, that was kind of like, music videos in the 90s for me, where I imagined what a lot of film was like for people in the 50s. Of these icons. It was like Janet Jackson and Madonna and some of these other like female celebrities that would be in that were in a music video, and they became these sex symbols. And they're not
Alicia Silverstone.
Alicia Silverstone and Crazy. Oh my god! Like, I was in the age group where everyone, like, she hadn't been, we rented The Crush just because we knew it had the girl from the Aerosmith video in it. She was famous and a sex symbol way before she ever got involved in acting. Like, she was just ideal that everyone saw in these videos, and she like eats a Twizzler stick. Like, that's the most probably erotic thing that happens in the video. She makes out with a guy, and she puts a Twizzler stick in between her mouth lips. And sorry to give you the caveat on that, but yeah, like, I mean, we look back and we think about like how pedestrian or how provincial it seems for ones back then, but then I look back a decade and a half ago, 2 decades ago, and it was the same thing. Like, every generation, which is kind of scary for what, like, the podcast is going to happen between Ben's twin girls in like 25 years.
We're not even getting.
It's going to be horrifying. Like, you remember when people used to do it without being in 0G gravity? I don't know why that was the first thing that I thought of as far as sexual advances, but clearly I want to do it in space.
We're going to move on from that, from talking about my daughters. Anyways, yeah. Whatever.
You can read more about this in my How to Derail Ben on a podcast.
I actually really do, but I do completely understand where you're coming from, and you're absolutely right. So, there was this long period of time where we're talking about icons, where there wasn't any, especially, I mean, if we're talking about American cinema, and now Louis Buñuel and these other very avant-garde filmmakers were making films outside of the U.S. that were either banned from the U.S., they weren't allowed release here, where they were touching on a lot more interesting subjects when it comes to sexuality and developing a lot of really interesting things. And so, but there was this very protracted period of time where sexuality was considered taboo in American cinema. And during that time, you have you have your Elizabeth Taylors, and you have your Marilyn Monroes, and they were just overly sexualized and just considered
Rita Hayworth.
Rita Hayworth, absolutely. And it's really kind of an interesting thing, which is, I think, one reason why once the movement kind of came around to actually showing nudity again, kind of made a splash in America. It should have been one of those things that was kind of naturally progressive, like with the medium. Obviously, when you get to a certain point, you're going to start having these types of films. Now, pornographic films, specifically, were under the radar. They were being made at this time, and they were being shown and exhibited only to the people who wanted pornographic films.
Yeah. It's still being shot on film. Which is amazing. Like, I don't know why, like, I always find that so fascinating when I think about film history, but it absolutely fascinates me that there was a time when pornography had to have, like, setups and ridiculously special lighting, and was shot on film stock that cost a lot of money and were shown on the big screen. Like, it's amazing to me. Like, I mean, that's why one of the reasons why I love the movie Boogie Nights is that to me it's so foreign, but it's amazing that anyone was ever, like, there was a time when people, I'm sure, were thinking, like, this is the future of cinema. We're going to start airing these adult movies.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, anyways, in 1960, there was a film that came out called Peeping Tom. It was a British film. And Peeping Tom was considered at that time to be a trash movie. I mean, it wasn't a good movie at all. And the interesting thing about Peeping Tom is that there was a shot in it where Peeping Tom, I mean, it was...
Is his name actually Tom?
No. His name was Mark.
Missed opportunity.
Anyways, he is looking through his binoculars at a woman, and she exposes a breast.
Which one?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
And it was like a 4-second shot where she exposes a breast, and this was a film that was released in the U.S. and of course subsequently like banned by every religious institution because it's titillating or whatever. When obviously in the context of the film they were definitely trying to provoke a different emotion than titillation. It then created a big debate between, I think, especially in the 60s when a lot of the movements that happened there with the free love and everything that was happening with the ideals of keeping, art pure and keeping things unadulterated, that a lot of people latched onto the idea that it shouldn't have been, censored, which it was censored in the release in the U.S. That wasn't shown in there. And ultimately that film was later re-released in the U.S. by Martin Scorsese.
Huh.
One of Martin Scorsese's favorite films is Peeping Tom. But anyways, it sort of started this movement in the 60s where all of a sudden it became a little bit more and more acceptable, especially when you're dealing with a weird subject. I mean, obviously, a lot of these movies were rated what's essentially the equivalent of NC-17 or R, but it became more and more acceptable to show a little bit of skin. Mm-hmm. Or to show nudity in these. Bernardo Bertolucci was one of the huge proponents of that with Last Tango in Paris. And in Last Tango in Paris, he had Marlon Brando and I forget the actress's name.
Not Jessica Lange.
No. It's not Jessica Lange. She passed away a couple of years ago. I don't think you're going to bring it up. Anyways. That apparently he was being very manipulative, but for trying to be for the right reasons, basically trying to get sort of these certain images and these certain sequences on the screen. And it brought around this new age, essentially, where you were dealing with a film cycle, like a film organization that couldn't deal with titillation. But they could deal with sex being utilized in a subversive manner. Mm-hmm. Where
pornography... That's why some of them are so weird.
Pornography was pornography.
Yeah.
But if you utilize it in different contexts to try and further a point, maybe it was okay. And you really had it, like, besides The Last Tango in Paris, you had Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
Which had some very disturbing images. I mean, there were other films as well. There was, for example, well, of course, it all kind of came to a head at Caligula.
Mm-hmm.
With Donald Sutherland in 1973.
I'll have you know, as uneducated as I am, I had both of those movies on my list. Caligula and Last Tango in Paris. Nothing else you've talked about I've even heard of before, and now I have to go look them up.
You never heard of Some Like It Hot?
I've heard of Some Like It Hot, but I have not heard of Peeping Tom, or I've already forgotten some of the other ones you've spoken of. So
interesting.
Erection. No. It's a word that begins with E. It means something about ecstasy. There it is. Ecstasy. Totally gonna Google.
I totally thought you were joking with me for a second there. I was like, he's like, totally starts with that, an orgasm.
I am gonna Google where can I find ecstasy tonight and see what happens. I think it's gonna be pretty
interesting.
Good. Yeah.
But anyways, there was this very interesting journey that got to that point where, more and more films were being shown with nudity. And then, of course, there was a huge outcry from the religious community, but, we'll move beyond that.
Yeah.
But anyways, that kind of gives you some sort of weird, not really that comprehensive view of kind of what happened with sexuality in cinema between when, pre-code film first came out to the 1970s, which is when I feel like sexuality in film really kind of blossomed and became a big thing. And I almost want to talk to Matt at this point because I want to know what your concept of sex in film has been since then, or even
penis and vagina.
Yes.
No, I honestly to me I look at it in two different ways, and we've kind of hit upon those ways a little bit in the discussion so far, which is there are movies that are sexy because they're like just a lot of nudity and a lot of sex and not a lot else. Like, I was a big fan of the Emmanuel movies. It was probably my introduction to quote-unquote foreign cinema as a child, was, watching the Emmanuel movies, because they were just sex scenes. It's really, they were essentially softcore pornography. They weren't really films. Although, I mean, I'm sure there's some merit to them. I don't know. I haven't watched them in 20 years now. But you have the ones that fall into, this is a movie about sex or containing a lot of nudity, or there's a lot of titillating imagery on here. And there are ones that are actually about sex, where sex is something that's explored or discussed, or an integral part of the character work in the movie. So, I mean, you've got things like, you have Showgirls is a movie that's just about, we're going to show as much TNA as possible, and we're going to try to do it with a former child star, because that's even more titillating than if this was just some porn star. That's great. Fine. Showgirls is what Showgirls is, and Joe Esterhaus can argue as much as he wants that was a different movie, or that was something that was going to mean more at some point. It wasn't. It was, I don't know, maybe in his mind it was. Whatever came out of film was not. And you have the predecessor, really, to that in the 90s for me, which is Basic Instinct. And Basic Instinct...
Also written by Joe Esterhaus.
I know. Yeah, I will argue, though, that Basic Instinct at least makes the attempt to be a murder mystery cop movie, and it's also how it's cast, I think, a little bit. You've got Michael Douglas, who, he's done movies, he's done good movies, you put a strong actor in this film, and you made something that's really, when it comes down to it, Basic Instinct is a murder mystery movie, with sex as a part of it, but sex is kind of like its villain's perversion. It's like if there's a movie about a guy that makes bombs, and you show a lot of scenes of the guy making bombs, that's his fetish. In this movie, the fetish is this chick likes to have sex with men and women, and that's her thing. But yeah, I mean, and that's where it's kind of interesting to me when I was writing up my list, because I didn't really have am I looking at the progression of sex and cinema? I started thinking about movies I either find sexy, or more interesting to me, actually, were the movies that are not sexy, but examine sex in a frank manner, which is why I have movies on my list. A movie on my list like Clerks. Clerks for me was one of the first times I watched
suck any dick out on the way.
Yeah. Clerks was the first time I watched a movie where people. I mean, I was in high school, so I wasn't even talking as filthy as they were. But these were people talking about sex the way people tend to talk about sex.
Talk about sex,
and they're talking about real things. They talk about a snowball in that movie. You know, like it's like they're talking about the baseball score. You know. That's fascinating to me, and I thought that was a cool shift in cinema that happened in the 90s, where it didn't have to be, it could talk about sex in the way that people do and address real topics, real concerns with these kind of things that aren't, no one's going to say Clerks is one of the most erotic movies ever made. You know, it was an NC-17 for language and subject matter, but it's not a sexy movie. Nothing in Jersey is a sexy movie, but... it's cool, like, to hear people talk about stuff like that. So, I mean, that's kind of how my list was sort of filled with movies like that. Or when movies pushed boundaries in regard to sex. Which, another one on my list that's not, again, a sexy movie, is There's Something About Mary. There's Something About Mary is the first time that I recall, at least, seeing in a mainstream movie a semen joke. I mean, not just a masturbation.
Right,
there were plenty of there were masturbation jokes on television shows at that point, but I had never once seen someone
Seinfeld for God's
yeah,
sake.
exactly. Yeah, they can't say the word masturbation ever once in that episode. It's master of my domain. It's whatever. They can't say masturbation, and then you skip 2 years later or whatever it is to There's Something About Mary, and you have semen literally dripping from a character's ear. And then being put into another character's hair and playing a sight gag off it. And what was funny is I have a very vivid memory of that movie in that I was, it was literally 3 days before I turned 21. I was, and Ben actually knows sort of the event I'm about to lead up to.
Yeah.
I was in Tampa Bay, getting ready for the Georgia-Purdue bowl game in 2000.
2000.
It was the millennium. Yeah, it was the millennium.
It was Quincy Carter.
Exactly. Yeah. Awful football game. But that New Year's Eve, I couldn't technically go out and drink. I was going to be turning 21 in 3 days, which is that's just torture to a kid to put him in that situation. But I was in the hotel room with my mom and my dad, and my mom got like a couple of bottles of like cheap champagne for midnight. And we're like, okay, we're going to have drinks. Like, we're going to, I was in college at that time. She's like, yeah, well, we'll have drinks. It's fine. So my dad passes out early. And what should pop on the television on their HBO station is There's Something About Mary. And I'm mortified. Like, I've seen this movie in the theater, and I'm mortified to watch this with my mom. I'm like, I don't know. This is like, it's just way too adult, and there's too many things. My mom was, like, laughing her head off. And just was like, this is so ridiculous, but it's so funny. And she laughed at all these things, and I'm like, this because we may be open with our own sexuality, or maybe open with our parents, or open with whatever. But there's something that happens when you're watching a film that shows an experience that's completely out there, but everyone's like, there's kind of like a recognition.
Like, that kind of makes sense.
Of acceptance of like, okay, maybe this exact situation hasn't happened to us, but guess what? Everyone has dealt with at some time some sort of expulsion from the male body in a bad way, and it's like, this is funny.
And that's one of the reasons why I can actually bring up very, very fondly American Pie, is because American Pie is one of those films that I think became popular because of the way that they were dealing with the expulsion of male fluids. And the thing is like, when I saw American Pie, I was in the period of my life where I was, probably fucking my couch cushions. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't, I didn't know any better. I didn't know any better way to get it done.
No, well, and what's great about American Pie, a lot of people, they talked about it when the movie came out, and I think people have gone away from it, or they feel that, like, maybe it's not a popular argument. Listen, American Pie is on paper, and for sure, the majority of the focus of that movie is about 4 guys trying to get laid, and that's the thing. But I think something that American Pie does really well that not enough people talk about is it handles the female characters. Even though they're secondary characters, it handles them extremely well with some of the same concern. I mean, even Allison Hannigan's character, I love the line of, like, I brought, like, you're gonna double bag it with the condoms because I saw the internet tape. Like it's a throwaway bit, but it's like this is the one of the only characters probably in the entire movie that's completely in charge of her sexuality, knows exactly what she wants, and there's no like learning curve for her or anything. It's just like, yeah, I know exactly what I want. I know what you are. This is why I did this. I'm completely in control of the situation.
Yeah, what a movie like that did is it reversed the paradigm that was created in the 80s with a lot of the movies like Porky's and Caddyshack, where it was like, I don't know, I mean, where you had a lot of this very inherent sexuality that had then been developed. Because the thing is, the 80s, at that point, had gotten just kind of commonplace, where it was acceptable to show nudity and have titillating stuff, but it was like, that would be a driving factor to get people to movies. It was like, oh, well, this movie had a bunch of titties in it.
This completely parallels our last podcast on CGI, which is exactly what happened in the 80s, which was, we can show nudity, so let's just show nudity whenever we can show nudity because people love tits. So we'll show a lot of tits in our movie.
Which is totally still true.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Well, no, it's not the same as far as cinema goes. You mean for tits or for CGI?
I meant for tits.
Okay, no, not at all. Tell me the last time
I'm saying
there was a mainstream movie that sold because it had a woman showing her breasts.
I wasn't saying that. I was saying, tell me the last time that you were disappointed when you saw a girl's tits in a movie.
Let me go in my room and think about this. No, but there's a very interesting with the advent of the internet and stuff. It's no longer
right.
Cinema isn't the only place you can go to see this kind of thing.
Whereas now, today, the stuff that's being shown in movies and independent film and the way that sexuality is being depicted pushes the boundary beyond pornography sometimes.
Mm-hmm. He pushes it into pornography.
Well, in the same way that Clockwork Orange was like, they were being subversive. They're not making anything pornographic. They're making something that's disturbing.
Like Kids did.
Kids is a very great example because Kids elicited a huge reaction from the community. Today, and this is just a very recent observation, the most recent Palme d'Or winner at Cannes Film Festival is a lesbian film.
Yes, or Blue is the Warmest Color.
Blue is the Warmest Color, which has a very explicit, uncut, 17-minute lesbian sex scene that is not censored at all. And at this point now, that is, I mean, they're pushing it as avant-garde as they possibly can in today's society. Even when you get into television and some of the stuff that's being shown and being done with what
Spartacus and True Blood and
I'm even talking network television. It's kind of crazy. What's going on there? It's obvious that there's been a sea change to the point where, and I think the ideal, at least for me, is that we catch up to the point where obviously. Excessive violence is allowed everywhere.
Yeah.
In popular mediums all over the U.S., where sex has been treated as this taboo, and I think a lot of people really really agree with me, at least, on the fact, and Matt too, that sex shouldn't be.
Well, and what's interesting about television, because television has somehow, like, television has broken some boundaries down, and this is going to be a weird one to say, but it's entirely true. Television broke the penis barrier. You still can't show most of the time. Like, they've tried it. They can do it for comedy in a movie. You can do it in Bruno and show a dick on screen being used in a comedic representation.
Nowadays, they're using dick and Shame.
Shame? Yeah, but Shame wasn't hugely mainstream. It's close. But I'm going to say there's more dick. All right, starting with Oz and then going to stuff like Spartacus and True Blood and stuff like that.
Fine.
There's a lot more...
There's a lot more dick.
There's a lot more dick, and there's a lot more sexual dick. It's not just dick. Like, it's like an Austin Powers scene without the things covering it.
There's more erect dick?
I don't know. They haven't...
They haven't done that.
They
haven't done it.
They have.
They have.
But those are I don't count that movie with Willem Dafoe.
I really applaud guys like John Cameron Mitchell with Short Bus who are actually showing real sex on screen.
I don't applaud. Listen.
In a non-pornographic sense, yes, absolutely. Utilizing their soapbox and actually...
I haven't seen enough, I'll be honest, I haven't seen enough of Short Bus to know.
Oh, I've seen Short Bus. Short Bus is great.
Alright, see, I think a lot of times, not all of the times, and maybe more than some, but not a lot, somewhere in between those ones, I think that there's the, like, we're going to paint this movie where I could watch the movie without the penetration and still get the same feeling out of it.
They don't show the penetration in the movie.
They do in the Short Bus, they do.
No, like once. At
A
the
lot.
very beginning.
I know Short Bus. I've seen the pertinent scenes.
Okay.
There's, believe me, maybe
they show the
it's
sex.
different when watched in context.
No, I'm saying, well, you're being, well, of course you say penetration, I'm like, first penetration? No, that I was just thinking like...
Emotional penetration? No, there's penis and vagina.
Yes.
Are you talking about sex? No, I'm talking about penis and vagina.
No, idiot.
Yeah,
sex.
and I think it's very difficult sometimes to separate the two. Like there was what's the movie Antichrist, the one with Willem Dafoe, which I did watch, and is not. I don't think it's a good film. I did not like it. You liked it?
I like Antichrist.
It's okay. I didn't feel that.
I'm very hit or miss on Lars von Trier. I actually like that film.
I'll be honest. I'm mostly miss on Lars von Trier. Maybe it's just me. I just don't get it a lot of times. I think it's trying. It's trying too hard to go outside the box.
Well,
where I think that you could rein.
If you've watched Breaking the Waves,
there's
Breaking the Waves did things that had never been done before.
No, listen. I recognize the things that are good about some of those things, but
I don't really like the Dogma 95. Just to clarify, I don't like the Dogma 95 stuff. But whatever.
No, I mean, and it is a very fine line to tread between, all right. Look at something like Monsters Ball. Monsters Ball is a great example of mainstream.
Say Monsters Inc.
I do love that movie. That would have been the weirdest segue ever. I'll tell you what, the most erotic film I watched of the last decade starred John Goodman and Billy Crystal in maybe the greatest man-on-man love story since Brokeback Mountain. That movie is Monsters Inc. No, I think that, God damn it, you just completely derailed me. I'm now having the weirdest thoughts about Sully and Mike.
Now you understand how I feel.
Oh, no, Monsters Ball. All right. Monsters Ball, a lot of people argue that Halle Berry won an Oscar because she got pounded like a slab of meat by Billy Bob Thornton in that movie. Audibly. Just in case some of you haven't watched it 174 times, like some of the other men, there is audible sex in that movie. And I'm not talking about moaning. I'm talking about a moment where there's... That is Billy Bob's balls slapping up against Halle Berry's thighs, okay? It is in overtly... But... I don't... And that's one of those movies that gives me a confused boner because I'm like, I don't know if this. I think it's a great movie, actually. Not an amazing film, but it's a very well done movie. It's got some amazing performances. It's an interesting story. I don't know if the overtness of that scene makes it a better movie, or if you took that scene out, it would still be the same.
I think it would still be the same movie.
And
I agree. I mean, the one thing that is always debated about that movie is that during that sequence, it's intercut with the bird, being
bird
let out of the cage.
Maybe the most on the nose.
Yes, which I remember
ever.
we had that argument in film school whether that was too on the nose or whether that was something that was actually very artistic, and it was a very heated argument between a lot of people.
I can imagine. I did a lot of rewatching of the scene. Well, let's watch it again to make sure that we're right about that.
No, we just watched that and we're like, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, whatever. Anyways, well, I mean, but it's an interesting journey that we've taken to now, and even with what you were talking about, like where our kids nowadays are going to be watching porn on the internet. I mean, in 10 years, they're going to be like having fucking like like contact lenses where they could be like porn, and it's just gonna put porn.
I'm in class and I'm watching porn,
and it's gonna go over their eyelids, and they're gonna watch that.
I mean, there was an article, a couple articles actually last year that were talking about the lack of sex in mainstream. Like, when was the last time you saw two A-list stars engage in nudity and sex on screen?
I don't know. I mean, I'd like to say that it was Antonio Banderas and Salma Hayek in Desperado, because that's the only thing I can remember.
Or Antonio Banderas and Angelina Jolie.
Or Antonio Banderas and everybody.
Yeah, Antonio Banderas, and he always, even if it's not explicitly in the shot, he's always wearing
I think
spurs.
it was in his contract. He was like, just so you know,
yes,
I have to make love.
Have you seen my wife? It's Melanie Griffin. Not what she used to be. So make it so
that's
mean. Too soon?
That's
Melanie
mean.
Griffin? She's got something's going on in the face with
but they
the Botox.
love each other.
He's doing a lot of... He's got sex scenes in Puss in Boots, which is a porn movie without even changing the title.
Oh, God damn it.
Puss in Booties.
I think we should... let's wrap this up.
I think... that's a good segue for what you say before you have sex.
Sorry, this is bad radio.
That one, much like many of my sexual exploits, was totally unplanned. And that's a gift for all of you out there. Listen, we have clearly, barely unsheathed the tip of this conversation.
No, we're definitely...
Which is why we are going to open this up.
This is going to be a two-part.
We're going to have a sequel to the sex talk. We're bringing some ladies, and we want to hear what these ladies have to say about this, especially when their little faces are so close to our phallically shaped microphone right here. It's going to be very erotic.
That microphone is like 4 times bigger than I have ever been in my entire life.
I just got images and it got weird. Alright, listen, before things get like supremely weird, we're gonna call this one off. But this has been the New Way podcast discussion about sex in cinema, and we've got more to come.
There's nothing you could say that could possibly not be considered sexual at this point. So
I am Matt. Totally not sexual.
I'm Ben.
And we'll talk to you next week.
And I've been...
Dude, you didn't prepare before you went on a limb with that joke.
Fuck you.
Cheers.
Cheers.